Okay, let's continue with part 4 of Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss, Something from Nothing. Let's see now their claims about science being incompatible with religion.
Just because they have some kind of historic origin.
But before we get to that, I want to touch on whether science is incompatible with religion in your view, and why. And I'll talk about my opinion in that regard too. But one of the things that you've set out, well, we both enjoy teaching science, and we want to, and one of my goals and your goals is to help people understand science. But I think it's fair to say that one of your purposes in doing that is to destroy religion, is it not?
You see, like, of course, and I think, although I don't think Richard Dawkins really admits it, but I think he really hates religion. I mean, he admits it, but let's see what he says about it.
Well, I love truth. I love scientific truth.
Me too.
And in my own field of biology, ever since Darwin, we've got a very, very long way towards understanding it. And I'm now learning that in your field, we're coming stunningly close to understanding everything. And that is such a beautiful idea, such a wonderful, exciting, exhilarating idea.
Understanding is always good.
It is, I would go as far as to say, an obscenity to fill a child's mind with a parochial, small-minded, petty, medieval alternative, which has nothing going for it whatever.
Nothing going for it. So this is the false dichotomy again. Either you're either you believe in science or you believe in religion, and religion has absolutely nothing for it, and it's small-minded, petty, and medieval. All those things are obviously wrong. Religion, like I said, has many things for it. You can see the arguments that I have on my channel. I have some there, and I will post more when I have time, and certainly I will do that. And it's not medieval anymore, because we have evolved in our theology as well, and in our understanding of God. And really, what happened during the medieval ages were errors of people that made wrong decisions. It was not, Christianity didn't change. The Bible is the same. Was the same when it was written, is the same now. So during the medieval ages we didn't have a different Bible. We just have people with different understandings of it, and some of them wrong. And it's not petty or small-minded. Maybe Dawkins thinks that, because I think I saw that in some of his talk, in some of his interviews and debates, because it doesn't really understand the logic of Christian theology. And of course that's a very long subject that I'm not gonna go into now, because that's not the purpose of this video. But what I really don't like in his critique, and that it says it has nothing for it, which is false. It has lots of arguments for it and some evidence. And really, I even think that false religions have things for it. For example, I think that Islam has things for it. It has a book that certainly is a beautiful book. Well, in terms of poetry, people have said it's miraculous. Some people have claimed that. So it has some evidence for it. I don't think it's persuasive, but it certainly exists. And there is evidence for atheism as well, but I just don't think it's persuasive. And then it draws the false dichotomy again between science and religion, and this is my main critique of him. There is no the dichotomy is false. There isn't, you can be a religious person and a scientist. I study mathematics. I consider that to be a science, so I think in a sense I'm a scientist, and yet I'm a Christian, and I don't see any incompatibility at all with that. Let's see what they have to say more.
It sounds like a Christian that have converted, but I bet it's a question for
what was that quote from Stephen Weinberg that you just?
Science doesn't make it impossible to believe in God; it just makes it possible to not believe.
Yeah, I think that's too weak. In the following sense, that it doesn't just make God redundant. It doesn't just give God nothing to do, which it certainly does. I mean,
it certainly does.
Biology, ever since Darwin, has left God nothing to do.
That's not true. Dawkins claims that certainly, remember he said, and certainly, science leaves God with nothing to do, since Darwin, of course, when claiming this, and he presupposes miracles are impossible, naturalism is true, an unwarranted assumption. Well, of course, if God doesn't exist, and if naturalism is true, then certainly it doesn't do anything, because everything is explained by naturalism. But even if miracles are not, no miracle happened, you still have, well, I mean, of course, if there is no direct intervenence of God in the world, in a sense, God has nothing to do. But I think that's false, because I think God intervenes in the world, still intervenes today, has intervened during history, and intervenes. And you have lots of miracle reports. Some of them are fake, some are not, and you can find some of them with multiple attestation, enemy testimony, um, early sources, um, etc. So those certainly are evidence. Of course, Dawkins doesn't apply the standard historical method to this. He applies the super skeptical historical method, which is the one that doesn't believe in anything. And he only applies it to these specific events because they cannot be true, because he supposes that God does not exist. Uh, and uh, and he claims that uh, science leaves God with nothing to do. Well, I believe that God is the explanation for the existence of the universe, um, and I think that is the best explanation for the design of the universe, is the best explanation for the miracles of the universe, and is the best explanation for the things that he actually does, like the experiences of some people, certainly, that God causes them, etc. So, and even in sustaining the universe into existence, I think God has a part on that too, as an essential part, and in the existence of our own souls. So I think that God has lots of things to do. Now, what science takes out of God, in a sense, well, it doesn't really take, because God was never really doing that, is make the natural, well, it makes the natural world work in a sense, but it is not like he's doing, in a sense, he's doing miracles all the time, but uh, it's not like you need God to fill the gaps in scientific knowledge, such as how the planets orbit the sun, like Newton thought that someone was adjusting it and things like that. But so science takes out of God like the explanation for the rain and for the thunder and things like that. But those things were never meant to be explained by God in the first place. Well, in a sense, God is the explanation of everything because He created everything, but He's not. I mean, if you assume that the world works naturally, you don't need to postulate God to explain those things. But that doesn't, uh, that has nothing, that doesn't hurt the theist in any point, because the theist doesn't invoke God to explain those things. Uh, so let's see what he says more.
And it now sounds as though physics is
Oh,
doing the same thing.
this one.
But a God who has nothing to do is still uh, a complex, improbable entity of exactly the kind that we spent our lives explaining. So the whole Darwinian enterprise and the whole enterprise that you're engaged in physics is to explain how we can get to things like gods and explain them. And so if you suddenly then import a god at the beginning of the universe, that's a betrayal of the entire scientific enterprise. It's not just that God's not necessary. God's an excrescence, a carbuncle on the face of science.
That's so stupid.
Well, okay. In fact, I agree with it. Actually, we were talking earlier. I think it's even stronger than that, in some sense. God is not. In order for God to do everything God is purported to do, God has to be much more complex than we are. In fact, you're imagining a being of incredible complexity, in fact, in religion, unfathomable complexity. And you're just positing it by fiat. But you're saying that the complexity of the regular complexity that you or I can't be made by natural processes. And
That was so bad. I mean, Cross and Dawkins keep talking about God being complex, while they ignore that God is only complex in powers but not in structure. Moreover, nothing follows from God being more complex than we are. Of course, I mean, God is really complex, but in powers only, not in structure. Like, let me give you an example of this. This is actually an example that was given to Dawkins himself when Dawkins was at a talk with the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the moderator had to teach Dawkins some things about philosophy, and this is one of them. So something complex in powers uh, is, for example, well, something complex in powers can be, for example, a blade. You see, a blade is very complex in powers because you can use it to cut meat, you can use it to cut a throat, you can use it to shave yourself, you can use it to shape wood, you can use it to do all sorts of things. But it's very simple in structure, it's just a blade. But if you think about a shaving machine, to shave your beard, that's very complex in structure, but not very complex in powers because it just has a very simple power of shaving your beard. Of course, you could do some more things with it, very creative, but it doesn't have as much powers as the naked blade has. So in the same sense, God is a very simple in structure because it's just a soul with three centers of consciousness according to Christianity, and if you go to Islam, it's even more simple. It's just a soul with one center of consciousness, and it's very complex in powers because it has infinite power. And Lawrence Krauss says that God is ineffably complex in religion. That's not true. I don't even know. Like, I mean, ineffably complex, ineffably complex would mean something like he is so complex that you can't describe it. And I don't think that God is ineffable at all. I mean, I think he is some attributes of him we cannot understand completely, but we can certainly describe him. I mean, I can say God is good, God is powerful, God is omniscient, and we can know many things about him. Actually, of course, we cannot know everything, but we can know certainly many things. And just because we cannot know everything doesn't mean that it's ineffable. I mean, that it would be ridiculous for me to say the universe is ineffable because we can describe lots of things about it, but certainly we cannot know everything about it. Or maybe if God exists, He will tell us eventually, but I even doubt that a bit, that we will have like omniscience. And but that's an interesting question. But 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 the point is that Krauss here is saying that God is ineffably complex in religion, according to religion, and that's just wrong. Religion doesn't believe that God is ineffably complex, and it only believes that God is complex in powers and not in structure.
Processes, and yet you're postulating that this the pre-existence of something that's far more complex than we are.
Again,
Precisely, and that's exactly right. And
just one more thing. Dawkins actually in his book argues from this. He says that if God is more complex than we are, than the universe, then postulating God to explain the universe doesn't explain anything, and that's actually wrong. Because, for example, suppose that you are doing an archaeological excavation and you find, I think I brought this example already, I don't know if it was in this series of videos or in others. If you find something there, I mean some trace of a civilization that was there, well, the civilization is certainly more complex than the thing you found, but it doesn't mean that you cannot postulate a civilization to explain it. That's absurd. Okay, that principle of explanation is absurd, and Dawkins and Krauss are defending it very ignorantly here. Uh, and so their argument is doubly wrong. First, it doesn't follow that just because something is more complex than what you are explaining, you're not advancing anything, and they are also wrong in saying that God is complex because God in structure is actually a very simple entity.